So there is, as more people are connecting, as more applications are being powered, citizen services are being powered, most devices are connecting, there is a need to reimagine connectivity, and that's where I think convergence is talking about technologies like 5G, etc.
Digital is at the core of many of those smart components. While it is infrastructure, it's also powered significantly by digital. Command and control systems are again at the core of monitoring the entire health of the city. Digital is not only in terms of the infrastructure for the city, but also the delivery of the G2C services. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have a very topical session towards almost the evening of the first day session here. Today's session is focused on digital infrastructure driving smart cities. Smart cities is not a new concept. It's almost more than 5-7 years. India has been working on so many smart cities. And each of these cities have a lot of smart components which power the city. There is mobility, there is focus on safety, there is focus on lighting, surveillance, lot of infrastructure elements. And many times what happens is, and even when we look at the smart city RFPs and cities looking at building the city into a smart cities, they look at many of those components, put them all together, get one system integrator to bring multiple of those different OEMs to fix different components, and thinking that through that the city becomes smart. Digital is at the core of many of those smart components. While it is infrastructure, it's also powered significantly by digital. Command and control systems are again at the core of monitoring the entire health of the city. Digital is not only in terms of the infrastructure for the city, but also the delivery of the G2C services, delivery of how citizens interact with each other, with the government, with the infrastructure. And hence, the focus on how do we look at digital infrastructure in totality while powering a smart city. Now, it's a broad topic. I'm joined in by Daisy Chittilapilly. She heads Cisco business in India. And of course, Cisco being one of the largest companies in India driving digital transformation as its core. Without further ado, just to begin, Daisy, the first question is, how do you look at digital infrastructure for a smart city? And maybe if you could also draw in some parallels from Cisco has been driving digital infrastructure, not just in India, but outside India as well. Maybe some parallels on, what is the future of digital for a smart city, and how would Cisco look at it?
Thank you, Alekh. And, thank you to the Convergence team for having me. This is a continuing conversation for us for many years. Just to step back a little bit, right? Before we talk about technology, I think a little bit of context on why we are in this space. I think if you look at the report from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, by 2030, 40% of India's population, that's almost 800 million people, will be living in India's cities. That means that an additional, over the urban areas that we have today, another 700 to 800 million square kilometers has to be developed in cities in the future that will get built. I don't think I need to explain to this audience the problems of urban areas anywhere in the world, right? Over congestion, pollution, all the fun stuff that citizens like us, if we wear the citizen hat, don't want to face. So really, the concept of smart cities is about livability. It's about, fundamentally, it's about livability index. And yes, if there is something that maybe the last 2 years have made us more conscious about, it's the fact that everything we do to make cities livable, we also have to do in a way that makes for inclusive. It's leading to an inclusive future for all types of citizens who live in that city, and it's a sustainable city. Essentially, as we build out smart cities in India, the focus also has to be on inclusion and sustainability for the long term. So, of course, I'm from the tech industry, so I always look at this as the problem statement. And then what do we, and technology is something I'm very passionate about. So we look at this then and say, okay, what can tech do, and therefore what can Cisco do to make this a reality? What's the role that we can play? So the three areas that we broadly look at it as, and I'll talk about them. You're right, every infrastructure project today is 30 to 40% communications and information technology led. So there is this element, for want of a better word, I'll say smart internet. And if you think about smart internet, that's what's happening to us every day, right? A citizen is sitting on a mobile phone, is connecting to an application which is somewhere in a cloud or a data center. So there's this whole concept of the cloud is the data center and the internet is the network. So there's that whole element about smart internet. There is the element of smart infrastructure, and that's both physical infrastructure that uses technology to become more efficient, and there's digital infrastructure which is powering physical infrastructure. So infrastructure itself is in two pieces. And I think there is recognition today that digital infrastructure is infrastructure. If you look at the government of India, they've recently classified data centers as infrastructure, right? It's no longer roads and buildings that are infrastructure. Data centers are also deemed infrastructure by the government of India. And the third piece, which typically has to also be looked at to make any city smart, is industry. I will call it smart industry, but essentially all the economic activity and the players, the economic activity generating players in that space, that makes that, who also have to come to the party to make a city a truly smart city. So if you look at the internet side, and this is something that I can, as Cisco, we can speak with a degree of expertise as well, right? So there is, as more people are connecting, as more applications are being powered, citizen services are being powered, most devices are connecting, there is a need to reimagine connectivity, and that's where I think convergence is talking about technologies like 5G, etc., which is next generation. But there's this whole concept of looking at how we can scale more and more people joining this network. And I don't mean just the technology network, but this whole network of citizenry. Think about it as 1.4 billion people on a connectivity highway, right? Think about it like that. And what can we do in terms of technology to make that happen? Now, when that happens, obviously it has to scale. There is a problem of scale which is involved there. But there is also the aspect of experience, because it's not just about being on a information or internet highway. It's also about, if I'm accessing an application as a citizen, what is my experience when I'm doing that? When I'm talking to the government, the application is nothing but the way that I talk to the government of India with, right? So what's my application? What's my experience of that as a citizen? So there's a need to make this whole technology infrastructure a lot more predictive, a lot more smart. That's the technology piece itself maturing. So that's one side of it. On the infrastructure side, there is the physical infrastructure. So it's all the things you talked about, right? Power, it's water, it's about making, we are a country, have always been a country of rare resources. So making those resources more, how do we make sure that we make the best use of rare resources, and can tech play a role in that? So if you look at the way we are thinking about airports, thinking about roadways, thinking about ports, and how technology can help with making all of these, since the minister was supposed to be here, all of the mobility, physical infrastructure of mobility more efficient. So that's one way of using technology. But the other way of using tech is, I talked about data centers earlier, but there's digital infrastructure, and how do we build digital infrastructure, and how can that again be smart, etc. And then in cities, there's no escaping the build, right? The real estate build in buildings and homes and so on. And how do we make that infrastructure also smart? As an example, if you look at the building code in India, we are designating 45 liters per person per day as the minimum requirement of water. But we now know that if a building is smart, you can bring that 45 liters per day per person down to 25 liters per person per day. And some of the smarter buildings which are platinum, LEED certified, etc., you will see that they've already made this a reality. So on the infrastructure side, there's the physical infrastructure using tech which gets more smarter, more efficient, more sustainable. And there's the digital infrastructure which also is continuing on its maturity piece. And the third piece is industry itself becoming smarter, which means if a city is in the NCR region, it is very manufacturing heavy. So, how do you make that industry more efficient, less polluting, more sustainable using tech? That's the third element of how we look at the industrial vector and make industry smart. And related to that, so these are the three elements or the three lenses with which we look at a city. It's not an isolation of, I know we have a certain definition of smart cities in India, but the way that we need to look at cities is a bit more holistically, because you don't have a city which is separated from its citizenry or from its physical infrastructure or from its mobility and backbone conversations.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful, because I agree, right? The current way of looking at most of the cities is it's a la carte model, right? You have multiple smart components, and I put those smart components together. Does that really define, the smartness or the smart quotient of a city? I think the element on the problem statement which you define, that it should be more sustainable, a better way of living, right? And if that is the problem statement, we work backwards towards and see what is the a future of a citizen 10 years down the line living in a city. How does, when he gets up, what are the tools he will have access to, how digital it is. Then he gets ready, let's say goes, needs to book a car, gets into an EV car, he needs to park it, get it charged, work in office, work from home, hybrid environment. So it's really putting that persona of the person in future, and then building backwards now to deliver that digital experience for a customer in one day, right? And maybe in the evening, then he will come back, integrated with Alexa and other things, use his home automation. So those things put together, and of course with the concept of sustainability, sanitation, water, power, which are at the core problems of most of the cities, right? Which is a little bit on the back end, but directly impacts the sustainable quotient of a city. So how do we look at it together and then define the digital journey for a city?
No, so you're right. Actually, we have the concept, and you're absolutely right. We follow the journeys conversation, the persona and the journey of that persona through the day, right? And through 60-70% of their day, what will they do? So if I'm a knowledge worker, what does my day look like, and what will I do? If I'm managing a city, what will my day look like? It'll look very different from the person who's living in the city. If I'm an operator of a city, how does it look like? If I'm a service provider in the city, what will it look like? If I'm another constituency, what will it look like? So we do have, when we put out a technology conversation, we always look at it from a journey of a persona who lives in that city. And you touched on another very important point. If we just bolt on technology into existing processes, I am not sure we can achieve some of these outcomes that we want to go towards. So there is an element of co-opting people into the change management. There is an element, very large element, of rethinking processes before we bring technology. Technology is probably, if you ask me, it's the easiest thing to solve for. The change management with people, which is citizens, administrators, service providers, city operators, and the way in which all of these pieces will fit together. One of the things which has been our experience in Indian cities is the silos, right? Because utilities is, folks make their own decisions. The road transport and transport companies make their own decisions. City is another conversation altogether. How do we make sure that there is interoperability and information sharing and joint decision or intelligent decision making, data exchange and decision making between these entities that are operating in our cities is also a big concern. So the whole process re-engineering, the people change management, and technology and digitization is really what it calls for. And I would say it's a conversation, work in progress on that front.
Yeah. And since you mentioned Cisco is a tech company, so I'll get in a little tech on this, which is the entire debate around a decentralized network driving the city versus a centralized network, right? So I'll elaborate on that. Many of these, the way the network is also evolving. A lot of analytics today that happens for a city, it used to happen mostly at the command and control center, right? So the entire feed will go from all the smart elements, whether it is the IoT devices, the cameras, all the devices connecting various smart points, goes to the command control center, and that is where the triggers and alarms are created. So if there is a traffic violation, for example, right, the feed will go, the software will sit at the command control center, it will realize that the light has gone red, but the car is still crossing, and hence it is an alarm created at the center. Maybe a camera takes the picture. Camera also is taking the live feed, and then the software at the command control center will actually scan the image of the car which crossed when the light was red, and will do the processing and will create a traffic challan. Now with more and more analytics moving to the edge, which means the components where the cameras are deployed on the field, there itself there are analytics capabilities that cameras themselves are building. So they can themselves do this assessment then and there, and will only pass the triggers back to the command control center. And if you have so many of these devices running on their own analytics, it becomes a very decentralized network. Less traffic moving through the pipe, a lot of analytics happening on the edge, right? And insights going to the center. That's one model. Second is, of course, a lot of bandwidth keeps on moving, and the entire analysis happens at the central layer. Now, both these networks, so two questions. One is, how do you see evolving? Is it from a technology perspective, is it more edge network and decentralized, or more centralized? And also, does it create, or how do you manage the challenges around security, right? So many intelligent devices sitting at different places. How do you make the network secure? Or is it better to have a centralized because of security and such kind of challenges?
So I think in the IT world, there's always this centralized versus decentralized conversation that keeps on happening. But I think in the world, this is a boundaryless universe, right? More devices are connecting and disconnecting at speed, and not really in a very predictable fashion. So our philosophy, and I think that's the philosophy, pragmatic suggestion from everyone, is there is just no way that we can drag all of the data from the edge into a central store, compute it, and it also costs time. You may get a great decision, but you need some decisions in real time at the edge, right? So that, if somebody has to be caught for a traffic violation, it's better done in real time rather than have a ticket which probably goes later. And the fine is not the point. The point is somebody who jumps a red light could create an accident, and that's what you're trying to avoid. Or you have an organ being carried from one hospital to another hospital, you need a green corridor to be created on the go, right? These are the types of things you want. The fine is not the outcome that the city wants. If the fine is not the outcome. If you look at developed countries, they don't collect a lot of traffic fines, right? That's not the primary agenda of doing smart cities. So to come back to your question, a lot of data that needs to be, so as much data as can be processed at the edge and decisions can be made at the edge, that's going to make for a more efficient city, or any ecosystem, any subsystem, if you talk about it. But at the same time, you will also need to have enough. So the model will be a lot of any localized decision can be done at the edge. But if you need to look for patterns, and if you want to run deep analytics and make decisions which are long term, not in real time, but which have long term implications, then a centralized model where data, just the necessary feed, the intelligence comes back, the intelligence repository is central, and then you can look at massive amounts of data, look for patterns, and then make decisions to change processes. For example, if somebody cuts a red light at 11 o'clock in the night in a particular part of town, you want the decision of whatever to be done. That car should not cross the next red light also, right? So you need that decision to be in real time within the next 5 kilometers. But if you want to say that, for example, this particular area of Gurgaon is more prone to traffic violations versus another part of Gurgaon, and therefore you need more traffic wardens and cops in this part of Gurgaon versus the other part of Gurgaon. Or from a crime statistic point of view, you can see that and this is something we are doing real time in some of our cities, we can now tell from looking at data that certain parts of a city in certain time windows is more unsafe than some other parts of the city. This we can already do, right? So there's and if you look at the broader data worldwide, there's a 40% reduction in crime if you do predictive policing, as they call it. So if you want to do predictive policing, it can't be an edge decision. You have to look for patterns and you have to have intelligence in the command and control centers. But when a crime happens on the spot, then you need a cop or a patrol van or whatever to go to that place immediately, right? If there's a smart, if I'm walking down the street and I get attacked, I need to be able to push a button on a smart pole that should alert the closest patrol van to come to me if I'm in distress at that place. Maybe I can call 100, maybe I can't. Maybe I'm only in a position to push that button. The patrol van in that direction closest patrol van should find me, or the closest ambulance should find me if I have a heart attack in my car. Let's say, isn't it? I don't want to be there, but if that happens. But if we know that on that street between 11 to 2 is when this happens every day in the night, then a petrol van can keep going up and down over so it's this decision. Anything real time at the edge, anything that needs analysis and process change and decision making at the center. That would be broadly what it is. And cities are already doing this. Indian cities are already doing this. It may not be very publicly known, but this is the data I used is from an Indian city, right? So
on that note, of course, Cisco has done a lot of smart city work globally as well, right? So what are the key differences you see with a good, let's say, an Indian city which has reasonably deployed a lot of maybe smart digital elements versus a global smart city? And what are the core elements which are naturally to be different, or vis-a-vis what are some of those other elements which India could possibly borrow from some of those global smart city deployments?
So I think the thinking is, I mean, everybody has the end goal is very clear. Right? The end goal is on a sustainable city focused on living index of the citizen. Priorities differ from city to city. It happens in India as well. So for example, when we did Jaipur was very clear that for them tourism is a big thing. They had one persona they had was a tourist, right? So they had tourists as a big persona. They put a lot of effort around making sure that they had use cases which were tourist friendly in Jaipur. Not every city in India does it that way, right? So there is this prioritization is also different city to city. We are always in recommending that there is a base case of common things, because otherwise our cities will look very, very different. What is smart in Jaipur will not be smart in Bangalore, will not be. So there should be a common criteria of what every citizen wants, right? Finding parking space, having good waste management systems, crimes, so traffic management systems that ease congestion, pollution sensors. So there's some common themes that all of us want, irrespective of what cities we live in. And then there are the 20% change flavors of what it is. I think we can do a bit more work in that space. And also the way that we are organized. A lot of international cities have the mayoral system where the mayor you can have multiple silos, but for a city, there's a centralized decision making that happens. I think maybe that's another space that we can do a bit more coordination and collaboration. I think we tend to have, for example, smart lighting is a electricity board conversation. Smart, so we do see these silos very often, which are, and I'm not saying it's perfect or good or bad others, but I'm just saying from an Indian standpoint, these are two things perhaps that we need to definitely get over. And I don't think the conversation about cyber has still arrived. I think that's broadly, not just in the smart city space, but in general, I think we are still, we don't have our privacy bill is still heading to Parliament, right? So cyber on one side and privacy on the other side are both two sides of the same coin. So I think we have a bit more work to do in terms of making sure not just how about having secure transactions in cities, but also about privacy of data of citizens. I think this is another element that is still a maturing conversation. So not making any comparisons, but just from an India standpoint, I think these are three areas that need a little bit more broader consultation and clear thinking around.
Okay, good. So I am from Jaipur, so good to know about the tourism persona. I hope the Jaipur city becomes a classic example for other cities to follow as well. Uh, so I'll not go to the cyber part, and maybe just one last question from my side, and we will open it up for audience. I'm sure they will have a lot of questions to you as well, or maybe to me. Uh, now, one of the other themes today has been $1 trillion digital India, right? The $1 trillion revenue or $1 trillion digital opportunity. How, besides the usual GDP, how do we bring an additional $1 trillion of digital opportunity? There has been some reports and studies done on it. They have identified almost 9 themes of driving a $1 trillion digital opportunity. Many of those themes also focus around elements like elements of, say, a service delivery, efficient service delivery to the citizens. So it's around e-governance. It's around how do we make power supply equal, equitable, available 24/7 power supply to all the citizens. It also talks about rural areas like doubling the farmers' income, talks about e-education, and we have seen a lot of those e-use cases, even the e-citizen service delivery by the government. Now, a lot of these use cases are more service-driven, application-driven, SaaS-driven, which means the infrastructure plays. It's mostly of a inherently there will be a cloud play here, right? And infrastructure may be at certain location. So the concept of cloud becomes very integrated with the future smart city, right? Cannot be just infrastructure in isolation. When things and applications, and so many of these applications delivering the use cases are residing on cloud, there is data flowing through the cloud, data getting stored. I will keep the cyber part or the security part out since you have covered it. And Cisco has been more of a infrastructure focused or IT infrastructure focused firm, right? And of course, it has a different strategy as compared to maybe Microsoft and others, which are doing very heavy on cloud part of it. Though I know you are focusing a lot on Meraki and those components of cloud. But what is Cisco's view on the cloud adoption, and what is the integration of the infrastructure with the cloud?
Yeah, so the only thing we don't do we are not a public cloud provider. You're right about that. But it's not a secret that many of the public cloud providers have our technology as part of their stack, and they also carry our products to market. Maybe that is not as openly known. But let me answer your question about the $1 trillion economy and maybe move from there and give you some examples of the work we're doing, and that will answer your question, I hope, Alekh. So if you look at the $1 trillion plan, it's, for want of a better word, it comes from value creation because of the digitization of India. And in that, there are three or four big themes. And you talked about agriculture being one of them. And agriculture is a very simple one. 50% of our people are in agriculture. It only contributes, more than 50% of our people are in agri at this point. Less than 16% of the country's GDP comes from agriculture. And if you compare farmer incomes in India, $1,800 I think, and compare it to the Western world, if I look at the US, it's $83,000+ in the US. So clearly, this is a conversation about improving productivity and farmer income, right? Productivity of our farms and farmer income. So this is a space we're doing some work in. So I have some real projects to talk about. And yes, you're right. So what we're doing in one of our projects is we've put in sensors, which is the edge part of it. So there are sensors in the farms. We're doing 2 crops in Kerala, paddy being one and prawn being the other. So it's an aquaculture conversation. And sensors are collecting data on the ground. But there's also satellite data, which is freely available from ISRO, which we are looking at. So it's soil data, there's weather data, all of that is being massaged and analyzed centrally. And that, it is consultative with the farmers because they actually send in pictures from crop infestations and so on and so forth. So there's a whole host of data being collected, being processed centrally. So data analytics run centrally. And that is being used by the Krishi Bhavan to then give advisories to the farmers. So the ecosystem is all of us who are technology players. There is the farmer and there is the Department of Agriculture and Krishi Bhavan, who is part of it, and the IT department of the state as well, because they are ultimately they understand technology better than the Agri Ministry understands it, right? So Agri department understands it. Um, Before and after, so they have a call center for farmers to call and ask for advice. Otherwise, they keep getting pictures and advice on their phones about what to do and what not to do. So, before and after the project, the incoming calls to the call center of the Krishi Bhavan asking for advice has gone up more than 40%, because farmers have bought into this idea that this tech is, whatever analytics is, and weather has become very unpredictable. If you look at the space where we've done this project, Kerala has had floods every year and very unpredictable monsoons every year. So weather is changing. So all age-old wisdom systems have gone out for a toss. So the way to measure this is not to say we've done a great implementation and here's fantastic thing, but to say that is the advisory that Krishi Bhavan is giving, is there a pull for it? It's a push, but when it's a pull, it means there is some value in what was disbursed the previous time. And so somebody is calling in and saying, I'm seeing this, what do you want me to do? Right? Now, in terms of the conversation about is it cloud, is it not cloud? There's the edge. There's a small data center, which is the knowledge center of the government. And there is all this information lying in the repository of satellite images, which is coming from a third-party center, right? So the concept of a cloud, and we call it cloud, but it's really not one cloud, right? It's not one data center. It's typically a collection of clouds, and it's a collection of public clouds, and nowhere in the world do we see one public cloud provider in any instance. Everybody uses more than one public cloud provider. They have their own data centers. And typically what they're looking for is a way to orchestrate everything from from edge to a multi-cloud world, right? So, and that's what we do. We don't play in the public cloud space, but what we do is help everybody make decisions about where should you do what. Should you do it at the edge? Should you do it in the data center? Should you do it in the public cloud? And irrespective of where you place your work or your IT infrastructure or your workloads or your applications, how do you have sovereignty over this whole process? That's what we do as a company, right? We don't make suggestions that you only do public cloud, only do private cloud, or don't do one cloud versus another cloud. Our job is to advise customers on where is your work best done and best suited, and how do we help you gain end-to-end visibility of your process and of your outcome, and therefore manage for it and manage its security also. And have flexibility. You don't want to be locked anywhere, right? In your data center, in a service provider's data center. So how do you have flexibility to decide on the go where is what served best? So that's really what we do, Alekh, as a company. And
got it.
Yeah.
Well, that's a fantastic example. Just to share, we have done a study somewhere last year where we are looking at which are those industry supply chains which are not completely digital, where there is a huge disintermediation happening today, or a lot of disintermediaries, where there's a lot of loss of information happening or loss of money happening because of disintermediaries, which can actually be connected digitally, right? And what are those big $1 billion plus supply chain opportunities? So of course, farm to fork was one of those big themes. Healthcare delivery was another one. Insurance delivery to the farmers was another one. Those are all supply chains which are massive supply chains, where there's a lot of opportunities to kind of remove the disintermediaries through the use of technology. And of course, a lot of ISVs are already creating very, very innovative solutions. India is a hub of startups and unicorns, and there are excellent point solutions made by many people to bring it all together and solve the end-to-end problem. Each one of those could be really big problems to solve for the country.
yeah, and if you look at, manufacturing is another one, right? Same thing. We've got 16 to 18% of GDP, but if we have to become that 5 trillion economy, manufacturing has to be at least 25% of GDP. Now, the common thing between, and you'll say, what is it and what part of smart cities matters to this conversation? It's the mobility conversation, right? So, if I know this session was initially supposed to be mobility, but you can't get to manufacturing efficiency, or you can't get agri farm to fork to the billion-dollar promise of farm to fork unless the logistics cost in India, which is currently between 14 to 15%, is brought down to the 7 or 8% that it is in UK or US or China or Germany, right? So we have um, on the mobility side also a lot of work to be done. So these things are interconnected to each other as well. Talking about it's good to have an ambition in one particular industry, but the way that cities and urban centers and even rural centers are connected to each other has a big play to in how our industries also become smarter, more efficient, and contribute to that 5 trillion goal. So yeah.
Good. Thanks, Daisy. Before I pass it on to the audience for the question, slightly out of the course or out of the context question, since you represent Cisco, and Cisco is one of the largest technology companies, it's also one of the key clients for me personally as part of KPMG. What are Cisco's focus areas and priorities for the India market in the near short term, maybe next 1 to 2 years?
So, well, so we are working to the point about the digitization of India. We are doing a lot of work in manufacturing, agri, utilities, power and water. Cities, we've been on this journey for a while. Cities is a space we've been working in for 4 or 5 years now. But these are the newer spaces which are set for technology disruption, disintermediation, and it's work that we are doing. We've always worked with service providers, banks, and the government of India. Those have been for us. Those spaces are also changed. Technology is transforming, and people are rolling out new business models enabled by technology in those spaces also. But I think the one I want to mention here is the non-traditional sectors, which really are ripe for disintermediation through technology. And there are some very interesting pilots that we are doing in each of these spaces that I mentioned. And we continue to push the envelope on the smart city side as well, because I don't think we are anywhere. Most cities that have got rolled out have only rolled out phase 1, and mostly they are not enterprise-wide, city-wide projects, right? So that conversation is still going on. But some of these newer areas, I think there's a lot of promise of technology solving problems at scale in this country, and some very interesting projects in those spaces on the ground. Getting potable water, frequency and quality of water delivery. That's one. How to, power leakage is another problem that we have very much in our country. Sometimes by design, sometimes because of inefficiencies in legacy systems. That's the space we're working at. We're working in some of the airports on a very particular problem. If anybody's traveled by a plane, you know how much time it takes you to get to a gate and get away from a gate. So we're working on that. So a number of things in the space of transportation, utilities, agri, manufacturing. Not about selling to the CIO and the tech buyer, that we've always been doing, but really focused on some of the use cases that that are outcomes that these industries want or these sectors want. So that's what it is. But 4 things we do broadly as a company. The application space, because that's being reimagined. The whole cloud and application space is a focus. Cyber is a focus. Hybrid work, very topical right now, has always been a focus for Cisco. And yes, we are, if not the largest, one of the largest cybersecurity technology providers in the world. So that's the 4th space. But that's not the outcome, right? That's not what people want. So the outcome is through the lens of the domain that we focus on.
Okay, great. I'm opening it to the audience. If anybody has any questions, you can kindly raise your hand. We can have the mic come to you, and they can ask your questions. Yes, that's it. You have a question?
Yeah, I thought I would start. A quick observation and then a question. So you mentioned that there are a lot of silos in city leadership, and to try and overcome some of that, tomorrow, for instance, we have a full day, which is a city leaders conclave. So we have city leaders coming in from different parts of the country, and the idea is for them to be able to sort of communicate with each other and different areas of leadership and try and break some of those silos. You mentioned mayors as well. It's well known that in India, mayors are not really very empowered. So in the past, we've had sister cities conclaves where especially last year because of COVID, people were connected digitally. So we had city leaders who were connecting from different parts of the world with city leaders in India. And it was very clear, especially that the mayors in India are not very empowered. So clearly, if that were to be the case, then perhaps it would overcome some of these issues. In regards to a lot of the pilot projects that you mentioned, or projects that you mentioned in cities, or even in regards to agriculture or at airports, or from the point of view of safety, etc. How do those become scalable? How do those projects achieve scale so that they can actually be implemented in different parts of the country? And sorry, one more question. You also mentioned security, data security, and while you said that not to compare, but how does India compare with other parts of the world from a data security point of view for its citizens?
Yeah. So I think I'll give you a Cisco perspective, but I think it could work for anybody. One of the things when you do something very new in the world, very new in India, is you can sit in a stage like this and talk about it, but till you get into a production pilot, as we call it, it's just talk. So when we started in cities, we started by building what we then called, I'm talking about 2015-16, the Golden Mile concept. So we set up Golden Miles by adopting a stretch of road and smartifying it, for whatever better word. For all of the areas we are focused on, we pick a client who has a problem to solve and then see whether we can craft a pilot that solves that problem. And we do before and after, very tough, stiff. Even if the client is maybe a little bit easygoing, we do very stiff before and after measurements. Once we are able to prove that this is an idea that can work, then we take it on a roadshow, pretty much, right? We call other people to the work you're doing. When we started in cities, we did the same thing. We brought in a lot of municipalities, city governance boards, etc., and we show and tell. We show them the pilot, and we ask them to talk to the end person who sponsored the pilot. And then usually people, when they see something live in front of them, working in a live environment, then they're a lot more convinced about taking maybe a more ambitious step themselves, or at least a subset of it themselves. And that's the way it happens. So, for example, for many of the newer areas that I mentioned, our pilots are between 2 to 3 years old, but now you can start to see the green shoots of the conversation spreading and other people picking up. Like we started with one airport, then it went to 2, then it's gone to 3. We started with one port, so you start to see people who adopt. Otherwise, it's an idea, I think. And I think we must also put ourselves to the test of what we, because ecosystem readiness, like if I be very honest, as Cisco, we don't do everything ourselves, right? For example, in the Agri project that I talked about, the ecosystem that looks at the satellite images and makes sense of it from an Agri perspective is different. The sensor, we don't make sensors, so there are sensor vendors, and sometimes we have ecosystems overseas, but they can't work in India. So we have to find a local ecosystem in India. The stakeholders, right? You need the IT department of the state, the agri department of the state, more importantly in that case, the farmer. Because ultimately all of this is focused on making the life of the farmer easier, better, making their incomes better, their productivity per acre better. So if they are not part of the project, then this is what I said in terms of change management. They are not part, and you can do a technology project, and we've done many pilots in the past where we learned the hard way that if the primary stakeholder is not equally accountable and interested in the project, you can do all the projects we want, it'll never create any sustainable change, since we're talking about sustainability. So that's one thing on building a pilot that's real, and then putting it to the test of what is the outcome it has achieved, and then scaling it. I think in terms of cyber, it's an ongoing conversation, so you have, but I think if COVID has done anything, it has actually spread our attack surface even more. Because earlier we used to be able to look at boundaried environments and create forts around it. But in a flat world, and with all of us sitting at home and accessing all kinds of things, workplaces we work or government or anything else, it's really flattened. And so we've had you can look at the SAARC report about the number of attacks that have happened in the last year. I think it's a 300% increase in attacks in India. The bad thing about cyber attacks is nobody talks about it because everybody is worried about their image about. So we are encouraging people to talk about it because, if then the whole ecosystem can learn and guard and defend itself better. That's one. Big companies to small companies, there's a lot of awareness happening. Not just us, but government is doing a lot of awareness. Industry bodies are doing awareness. Providers like us are doing a lot of awareness exercises. And we're seeing it should be in the design of the whatever you're building. It should be in the core design. It cannot be a bolt-on conversation. You talked about persona. As a person traverses through the day, which are the weak links of their interactions which could expose them, expose their data or expose the systems that they're connecting to. So it needs to be built into the core design. It cannot be an afterthought. I think that's the big shift. And we are conscious about it. And like I said, the other side of it is the whole data security, privacy, sovereignty conversation, for which the PDP bill is in consultation right now and heading to Parliament sometime soon. So India is definitely thinking in the right direction on that one. And people have had head starts. GDPR is already out there. There are models from which we can borrow, figure out what is working, not working also, because some can be very draconian, and for a developing country that needs to definitely grow at 8 to 9%, we need to make sure that we don't regulate ourselves out of growth. So that is also in a flat world, right? So that's also very important.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, in addition to personal security or cyber security, we've also seen with the Ukraine war that even nations can be susceptible to vulnerabilities in their own communications infrastructure.
Absolutely. You can shut down electric grids, you can shut transportation systems, etc. So if you digitize without paying attention to security, everybody, when you think about security, thinks about servers and laptops and my phone at best. They don't think that your access control, your air conditioner's got an Ethernet port. These types of things can get hacked and then bring your systems down. And there's a number of cases of governments being asked to pay ransom money to, allow their websites and things to work. So, there is an increasing line of thought that the next war will be fought in cyberspace and not in physical space, right? And we are definitely in that world at this point in time.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? Maybe just the last or last but one.
This is Zarina here, and first of all, I'm feeling privileged to ask you a question in front of sitting over here. Ma'am, I just want to ask you out of box a question that we are talking about cyber security over here. There's so many protection security over here. We are talking about rural and urban development over here. There's one question always come into my mind that how can we use this kind of technology on that kind of VCS or a hidden crime like human trafficking to stop this kind of VCS technology, to using these type of technology to stop this kind of crime. So that a question come into mind.
Yeah, it's not a technology question, because tech can do whatever you want it to do, but it's a double-edged sword. So let me tell you what tech can do. Tech can today already make sure you have whitelisting, which means, let's say on the internet, you talked about trafficking, child pornography, all these types of things, right? You can put rules and policies out there. So you can whitelist or you can blacklist, right? So as Cisco, we have probably the world's largest threat hunting tech called Talos. It's a before day zero. It can look at patterns and determine an attack of which kind is coming. So a lot of federal as well as large companies, everybody uses that. It can do whatever you want it to do. It can be used for good. It can also be used for bad. So where do you draw the line, right? So whitelisting is a great way of talking about it. So you can stop people from accessing certain websites. Sure, can you do it and using technology? Of course you can do it as a technology. But it needs to be, it's not a technology decision, right? Then there's a question about freedom of the internet, etc., citizen rights in a democracy. That's a different conversation. So it's not, that's why I'm saying it's not a technology conversation. Tech can do, with the right policy, technology can enable anything, but the right policy, the right guardrails need to be in place. So we have to, and that's why I talked about the data privacy bill quite a bit. In the absence of a structure and framework and a guardrail, anybody can take it in any direction, right? So we get requests from governments for good things and bad things. Right? So, or from enterprises for good things or bad things. Is it right to check on an employee and every site they are, what is illegal? Yes. But should we be checking on what every employee is going to the internet for? Should we be doing that or not, right? So this is a question of what is right for an enterprise, what is right for a country or a government, and having a strong framework. Technology can enable any framework and stop many of these things. I'm sure you've seen the more public conversation around Apple, right? And the way that they're going to be reporting images, child pornography images. So tech is not a problem. Every company has the tech. But I think companies also need the right framework from governments and institutions to make sure that we also don't overthink, don't over-exercise our technological capabilities in unintentional ways.
Okay, yeah, maybe one last question, please. Yeah.
Good evening to both of you. This side Akash Dubey. My question is a quick observation on, like you have said, like connecting 1.4 billion people on an internet highway. So I just want to know, like, what's your perspective on the public Wi-Fi space? How public Wi-Fi spaces or like public Wi-Fi hotspots can create or bring a digital economy to, as we are talking about India, creating a 5 trillion economy. So what public Wi-Fi hotspot can do in bringing that particular target, achieving that particular target. Meanwhile, giants like Facebook, Google has already failed in India providing public Wi-Fi space. How public Wi-Fi spaces can achieve that particular target of bringing in like rural areas to the digital world, and the government has now initiated a scheme known as PM1. What that can do to bring the rural areas and connecting the rural people to the digital economy?
Yeah, so I think this budget mentions BharatNet, right? BharatNet is you can think about it as every state is building out their own part of the BharatNet, but ultimately that will be India's internet highway. But the last mile, the question you're asking is about last mile, and the last mile connectivity can be public Wi-Fi, or maybe it is 5G. Maybe it is 5G, right? So I know in India 5G auctions are still 12 to 24 months away, but there are two options for us. We can either do public Wi-Fi for last mile or we can do 5G. And frankly, that is the promise of 5G, because 5G will not be as complicated. You know, India has been fantastic. India leapfrogged laptop and went straight to mobile. So maybe the answer is for citizens, maybe 5G will be the answer. But for enterprises, small businesses, etc., it will be a combination of 5G plus public Wi-Fi, right? It will be, so citizens, I think 5G, but for like the village knowledge center will need Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
That's how it's built.
So actually it's, maybe just to add to this, see this, it will not be a one size fits all solution. For urban areas and we have seen how quickly India as a country has moved from 3G to 4G, right? And 4G, suddenly with 4G, so many use cases have opened up, which were never really there in case of 2G and 3G. But at the same time, there are 300 million users who are still using 2G. So the challenge with Wi-Fi in the urban areas has been largely around monetization. Right? They have not been able to monetize it sufficiently. People don't want to pay for it. So which means the monetization does not have to be from the customer, but from other sources of advertisements or from telcos. So the drive for public Wi-Fi in urban areas would be really dependent on how that monetization problem gets solved. The answer for rural could be different. With BharatNet and with the rural use cases around hospitals getting connected, schools getting connected, post office getting connected, community centers getting connected, village level entrepreneurs coming to teach people how to use internet over a Wi-Fi. There are some alternate solutions being made by companies which are specially tailored only for making a rural Wi-Fi work at a much cheaper price of the overall deployment as compared to an urban Wi-Fi. So it's likely that the rural may see a different use case driving public Wi-Fi vis-a-vis the urban centers.
Yeah, so I don't want to underestimate the monetization conversation. Some of the examples you mentioned are classic, have failed not because of technology but because of the monetization conversation, right? So what BharatNet is expected to do is drive a number of use cases to rural India primarily. That's education, healthcare, citizen services are the three big ones. And maybe agri and some of those other things. But whatever it is, there needs to be a monetization even at the edge, because ultimately I'm not sure that the government can indefinitely continue to fund the project, right? So at some point, and that's why the value perception of the end stakeholder is very, very important in this conversation. So in India, driving to the bottom of the pyramid is always about two things: affordability and ease of use. And in that space, our work with Reliance is an excellent example. It was the first world over IP network that we built. But what it did for Reliance is Jio to be able to then make it affordable for every Indian almost to be able to afford a phone, right? May not be a smartphone, but definitely a phone. And it did then create a ripple effect in terms of telecom affordability in the country. But it comes down to monetization, and both will coexist. I mean, to the point that Alekh is making, both will coexist. If you're in that space, you have to think about the monetization element. Technology, Wi-Fi 6 is already on the go. And the other thing which we also have to, from a tech point of view, if you are a player in tech and working with tech in your use case, open roaming is still a conversation in India, right? The ability to switch from 5G to Wi-Fi may be a bit technical, but what it means is seamlessly when I walk into a place with public Wi-Fi, my phone should switch to Wi-Fi. And when I go out from a place where public Wi-Fi is not there, it should switch to 5G. This in India is still not a reality. In many markets, this is a reality. So that also is a monetization conversation, because the telecom network is owned by the SP, the public Wi-Fi network is owned by the government, owned by you, owned by some other service provider, right? So this ecosystem marriage also has to happen if monetization has to work.
Some of the organization, I'm forgetting the name, they have already set up the open roaming standard, and you come to them, you become part of them, and open roaming, as you said.
So we are the proponent of open roaming worldwide. Okay. At Cisco, we first talked about open roaming. Okay. It may have different versions in different places. Yeah. But we are a very strong proponent of open roaming. But I think in India, there's still some work. Yeah. This is about ecosystems who are competing, necessary to collaborate also. That is the other thing about the new world. The world of digital, nobody can do it all by themselves. So people who have traditionally seen each other as competitors may also have to come together for the greater good of both parties. And open roaming is one such conversation.
I'm working on PM Vani project. So past 12 months, we are just, as you both people said, monetization. So we are just figuring out how public Wi-Fi can be monetized, so that if someone is installing the device and taking bandwidth for someone, and if it starts selling, will it be a benefit for that particular person? So we are just figuring out that from past 12 months only, whether public Wi-Fi hotspots can be a business model, can be sustainable or not. That's I have given the example like Facebook, Google, they all are failed.
I'll be very happy to listen to you if you crack the code on that one.
Oh, definitely, if we can, then I will.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen, all of you for listening patiently. We're already at top of the hour. We've ran longer, but I think it was an absolute pleasure listening to you, Daisy, for all the perspectives that you've shared, not only for me, but I'm sure for everybody here. Thank you very much, Daisy, for your time.
My pleasure being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that perspective and how technology can actually be leveraged towards solving the problems of today towards creating a better tomorrow. May I request Mr. Dhruv Behel, the Director, Exhibitions India Group, to kindly present a token of appreciation and gratitude to both our speakers. Huh? Yeah, after that. So how technology can be actually leveraged in optimizing resources, in bringing in greater cost efficiency, making India smart, digital, connected, driving a more inclusive, sustainable, climate-sensitive growth for India, and breaking the silos. We'll have a group photograph with the three of you, and then we'll have the message. We'll be closing the day with the message by Honorable Minister. Thank you. So as you said, the Honourable Minister was supposed to join us, and it would have been really enriching to know his views, especially this was a session where we had the future of mobility, and the Honourable Minister stands very passionate about the EVs, and we heard that the future is going to be more shared, connected and electric. Unfortunately, he's not been able to join, but he has sent across a message. If you can play the message, please.
Namaskar. It is a pleasure for me to interact with you. India is the fastest growing economy, and for that reason we need to develop the technology of 21st century. I really appreciate in the exhibition the way in which you are developing, particularly the smart city vision for the country. We need smart cities as well as smart and very, very important infrastructure for development India up to the world standard. I am really happy the vision in which you are all working 100%, it is going to create more employment potential and growth for India. The most important sectors, water, power, transport and communication, our progress is very good. I feel that about the future planning, we need to use futuristic technologies. For that reason, we need more research and presentation of new technology to the stakeholders. I am really happy with this exhibition and the convention. 100% it is going to qualitative contribute for our vision for development of new India. I am appreciate the role of all industry and organization which are organizing this great function, and I am giving my best wishes to all of you. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
So we thank the Honourable Minister in absentia for his very inspiring message. As you could see, this was a message which he recorded. He's in the aircraft only going in for the swearing-in ceremony at Uttarakhand. So thanking him. With that, big thank you to all the participants and delegates. It's been a long day for all of us, but thank you for being here and being very active participants in all these discussions and deliberations.